All right. Who has heard of James Moriarty? Know who that is? James Moriarty? It's actually a fictional character. Anybody know where he's from? Pastor Wade? Sherlock Holmes, yes. I like Sherlock Holmes, and I've read different books and different I say parts of books, like maybe not a whole book from front to cover, but sometimes there's a case, chapters are cases and stuff. So I've read that, but also seen movies and shows and things of that nature. And one of the most notorious criminals, evil masterminds, is James Moriarty. All right, the only person that really rivaled Sherlock Holmes in intellect. And he didn't care about anybody getting hurt, any crime being done. It was all about, having this mastermind chess game with Sherlock, right? He was evil and he was wicked, but one thing that we see that we cannot deny is his genius. He was really an evil genius. When you are outsmarting, when you are getting Sherlock Holmes, like, what in the world's going on? That's when right? You are a genius. And that's what in the whole, any detective story where he's involved, it's going to be a good one, because this is not just some run-of-the-mill crime boss person. This is a mastermind. He's a genius. And you could learn even lessons from his genius, even though he's evil. Another person that's highly controversial. It's loved in some areas, but controversial, and especially in areas in our community and things of that nature, is Robert E. Lee. Right? He fought for the Confederacy. Right? He fought for the side that was enslaving people on the basis of race. But even though he did fight for the evil side, and that was wicked, even his harshest critics would say this dude was a military genius. Despite losing the war, people would say, his harshest critics would say, he was one of the best military minds that we had. Even with people that you don't like, even people who are wicked and fallen, you can still learn some good lessons from them. We should be able to learn something from everyone, even wicked people, whether it be what to do or what not to do. And Jesus in this parable draws positive spiritual lessons from a fallen, morally corrupt, dishonest money manager, right? Though Jesus does not commend his wickedness, he does commend something about the man and wants the disciples, i.e. us, people who know Jesus, who are God's people, to emulate that skill for God's glory, for kingdom purposes. Now, one of Luke's broader themes overall, a big theme in Luke is he's talking about money, and he's oftentimes going after the rich. In this particular chapter, money, resources, possessions is a theme. Encouraging the use of one's possessions to use for the kingdom, rebuking or calling out the love of money of the Pharisees next. And then, in the last parable, he intentionally contrasts a rich man who lived his life for himself and a poor man who had no means but was a child of God. Even in that, we see that God cares not only how we use earthly resources, but how we use those resources for the poor, right? That's a testament of that we are children of God. And we see this theme throughout this chapter. Now, in our section here, verses 1 through 13, on the negative side, one of the things that Jesus calls out in our text is that God's people are not very creative, wise, skilled in using our earthly resources for the kingdom. Something we as individuals and as a church must work on. God wants us to work on. Positively, we see one of the main themes in our text here is that because all we have, everything we have, all the resources, all the money is owned by God, we must skillfully or wisely use our God-given earthly resources to maximize eternal kingdom impact. More simply, we must generously use our God-given earthly resources in a way that brings eternal kingdom impact. We must generously use our God-given earthly resources in a way that brings eternal kingdom impact. And let's look at this parable. Sometimes it could be a real story, sometimes it could be a fake story or a made up story, but it's designed to teach a real spiritual truth that we all must embrace. Look at verses 1 through 3. Jesus says, he said also to his disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. And the manager said to himself, what should I do, since my master has taken the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. So Jesus' parable here, and the major lesson is directed at who? It's directed at the disciples. Now, the Pharisees are obviously in the audience. They can hear, right? In verse 14, we're not going to get to verse 14 today, but we see how they heard everything and they ridiculed Jesus because they were lovers of money. And then the last parable in the chapter has money as one of the themes, and it's directly, I think it's directly written for the Pharisees. But in any case, right now we have a rich man, and then he has a manager. So this is a household master. He's the owner of his estate. He has a lot of money, and he has a manager. Now, a rich person back then with a lot of wealth would often have a trusted manager who oversaw the master's wealth and estate. He had the authority to manage other people in the household's wealth and make financial decisions. He not only controlled the financial of the estate, but he was entrusted to make good financial decisions to make the master or the estate more money. Often, a lot of times, could be a slave who rose up in household ranks and eventually got to this position of manager, right? And there's a privilege. Sometimes they're hired out, but sometimes it was a slave that rose up to the ranks. This was a trusted and privileged position. But the manager in Jesus' parable is not a trustworthy person. In fact, he's called the dishonest manager, right? He's a wicked, dishonest manager who is taking his master's money and resources he had been entrusted with to handle wisely for the estate's benefit. And what is he doing? He's wasting it. Maybe spending it on himself, making lavish purchases, right? Making maybe just foolish financial decisions. The text is not going to details, but what we do know is that he was wasting his master's money to such a degree that other people start noticing and brought charges to the owner. And like, hey, I think you need to rethink who you got out here spending your money, because he's just wasting it. So the master hears about it. And he's undoubtedly ticked, right? He confronts the manager with these charges about wasting his money and wants him to provide receipts of his manager and told him he would be out of a job. So basically he wants an audit done and a transparent accounting of the wicked man's record with his money. Now, the dishonest manager knows he's guilty, right? He knows he's been caught. He doesn't defend himself, right? He immediately thinks about his future. He knows he will be fired. He is guilty as charged, and he has to figure out what he's going to do after. And he's probably freaking out for a minute because his skill set and his resume and his personality does not give him many options to make money after he's fired, right? First of all, who's going to hire a former household money manager who was fired for wasting his master's money? In addition, he essentially says, I'm like a white-collar hedge fund manager type guy, right? I got no strength or skill to dig. I got no skill or a muscle for a tough, demanding blue-collar job. Also, I'm too prideful to beg for a living. I got to figure something out. I'm not going to worry about defending myself. I'm going to immediately think about what I'm going to do, how I'm going to be taken care of when I'm inevitably fired. I tend to think that the dishonest man was not wasting his manager's money out of incompetence. It was just out of his wicked depravity. Because the fact is, as the parable brings out, this wicked manager was not dumb. He was very crafty. He was very shrewd as the later, later master. Look at how the dishonest. Look at verses 4 through 7. I have decided what to do so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So he thinks of something, the light bulb goes off, right? So summoning his master's debtors one by one, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly, write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and write 80. So the evil genius goes off and he goes, I got it, all right? My master has a lot of people who want money, all right? If I can hook them up while I still have time and power, resources to do it, they're going to hook me up. They're going to welcome me when I get kicked to the curb. So the parable says he calls up all the folks that owes his master money, and the parable just gives 2 examples, but I'm sure it's more than that. The first one owed 100 measures of oil. Now listen, that was like 875 gallons of oil, a yield of almost 150 olive trees, right? So 3-year salary of an average worker's paycheck. This was a lot, right? This was a significant amount of debt. The unrighteous manager said, you know what? Man, that's crazy. I see seeing your family grow, things of that nature. I want to do something for you. I just want, out of kindness of my heart, I want to hook you up. What I'm going to do, right, is just, how about you just write an official receipt, right, and give me 50 of that, and then the rest will be covered. We'll have an official receipt and everything. How about that? So the person jumps at that. You respond, man, half of my debt, if I just give him 50, I'm gonna take care of that. I'm gonna do that, right? So he takes care of one person. Another person owns 100 measures. All right, this would cover 100 acres. So the debt was between 2,500 denarii and 3,000 denarii, or about 8 to 10 years of a salary of an average laborer's wage. And the wicked manager says, oh man, that's crazy that he manager with, my boss give you he should be the one who's doing this, but I'm going to do it on his behalf. I'm going to hook you up. He's out of control. How about you just pay back 80 of that and we'll be good? And the person jumps at that, right? So he's obviously trying to position himself as a good person, a hero in this, right? He's probably smooth, using smooth words and giving them compliments and all this stuff, because he really wants to depend on them when he's kicked in the curb. So the unjust steward or manager is wisely securing his future to be warmly embraced by the debtors. And these people were probably very, they bought it, right? Hook, line, and sinker. Can you imagine them thinking, man, I really owe this guy. He's really hooking me up. He doesn't have to do this. He doesn't have to do this. He's helping out my family. This is real money that I owe that I was going to have to pay back that is now gone. If he ever needs anything, I'm going to hook him up. So this unjust steward was wise, right? He acted in the present to secure embrace in the future. Additionally, it was also wise that even though he was taking off what the master was owed the master, he was actually giving a quick, sudden influx of resources owed to the master that would have never came in that timeline. So he got a quick 50 measures of oil, a quick 80 measures of wheat and things of that nature. So that was just, this quick money. Before he left, all this quick money comes to the master. And these actions were not morally right, but they were smart and crafty, so much so that the defrauded, offended master, look at the first part of verse A. First part of verse 8. The master commended. That means he's complimenting, right? The dishonest manager for his, and it makes sure it's specific, for his shrewdness. Even though the master had been cheated and money was wasted when he hears about what the dishonest servant had done, he commends him for his shrewdness. You say, what does that even mean? We don't use that word too much, right? It's a way of calling someone wise or crafty without saying that the person is a good person, good person. It's actually a morally ambiguous term, commentator to say. Just, they're very intelligently street smart. I like what one Bible Sense definition I read said this. I like this. It said, this is the idea of acting with practical intelligence. The master's like, wow, you smart, dirty dog. Right? You smooth operator, you smooth criminal, right? You are definitely wicked, but you sure know how to take care of yourself. Not only did you secure me a good amount of cash and resources before you left by authorizing these deals, but you made yourself a bunch of friends that will take care of you when I'm going to kick you out. You might be a dishonest, wicked manager, but you are smart, crafty, and know how to operate to make sure yourself is taken care of. So the master commended the having the wisdom to prepare for his future well-being by taking advantage of his situation in the present. Apparently, the master did not see this coming because he's so impressed by it that this guy is so resourceful. He knows how to make sure himself. He knows how to make sure he's going to be taken care of no matter what. As we will see, Jesus does not want I just want to point out, Jesus does not want his disciples to copy the servant's dishonesty. That goes without saying, right? It's not like, hey, we need to model this wickedness, but to show a greater level of shrewdness in this life that would impact a greater eternal reality. As one commentator said, Jesus was not teaching that his disciples to be dishonest. He was teaching that they should use material things for his future spiritual benefit. This was a good lesson from a bad example. Look at Jesus' words and applications on this parable. First, let's look at the first application we see in the last part of verse 9. Jesus says, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth. That's just talking about earthly resources that are going to burn up, right? Whether it be money or possessions. So that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal. So last part of verse 8 says, this world is way more practically intelligent in dealing with other people of this world and the resources of this world in order to better their earthly future than God's children are wise in using their resources to impact their eternal future. The world, the people of the world, unsaved people, are very good at being crafty with their resources for their advantage to set up their future. You know, our world is really obsessed with retirement, right, and investments, and even quid pro quo type deals, in that I do this for you now, you're going to owe me later, or I'm going to have to get this back later. The world is great in having foresight into their earthly future, creatively using their resources and relationships that have the most positive impact on their future. They may be fallen, but they sure know how to look out for themselves. They may be wrong, but they are sharp and street smart, right? God's children do not take that same practical ingenuity to maximize their earthly resources for eternity that is way more consequential than any earthly future. Jesus says, learn from this guy's practical intelligence in setting up your future, your eternal future, not your earthly future. He goes on to explain more, in verse 9. Look at verse 9 again. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. So application 1 here is that disciples should generously use their God-given earthly wealth shrewdly for the sake of others so that they will be welcomed into God's eternal home and richly rewarded. So disciples should generously God-given wealth shrewdly, creatively, wisely for the sake of others into God's eternal home and richly rewarded. Use earthly wealth in a way that impacts eternity. Being creative and wise in your generosity and how you use your money for others and for God's kingdom will have great positive eternal impact. One commentator says God's children should be shrewd with possessions by being generous. Such act shows charity and foresight. And foresight, looking towards the future, because they know that this generous and kingdom investment now with their resources will have greater return when they are welcomed in glory. So don't get it twisted here. Jesus is not saying that how you use your wealth will grant you entrance into the kingdom. But the way you use your wealth, compassionately, charitably, for the kingdom, to advance his kingdom, will be a sign that you will be received into God's eternal kingdom and rewarded. Now, the point whether they will be welcomed by friends that they help bring into the kingdom using their worldly wealth for gospel purposes or generously, or that they will be, it's really talking about, will be welcomed by God who will reward them from using their wealth generously for his kingdom, it's not as important to debate back and forth about, because I think both are true. Although I do think God is the ultimate subject, as he's the ultimate one to give us authority to bring us into his kingdom. The fact is, both of these scenarios are true. You will see people that will welcome you, that you have used your resources to help bring them into a kingdom for kingdom advance, right? Your money that you give to your cars and houses that you use to do the discipleship and bring people to church and hear the gospel, your money that you give towards missions and things of that nature. There will be people in the kingdom that got there by your investment. But also, God will ultimately welcome you and reward you for your using your earthly resources for his glory, for the gospel's sake, for kindness and loving your neighbor with it and things of that nature. We should put our minds to work like this dishonest manager and think, how can I wisely, shrewdly use the resources God has given me that will have the most eternal impact? Again, investing is all the rage, right, for some people, especially in Western society. What stocks can I buy into now? I have a person that works with me now, and he is often, on any break that he has the investments charts and things up, right? He like keeps up with it, right? And he doesn't even it's not even about apps on his phone. He literally monitors the chart all day. I'm like, this is why you're behind. But he looks at it a lot, right? And crypto and NFT and mutual funds and 401ks, and we hire financial planners and read, and there's tons of books written about how to smartly use your money to plan for the future. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of that stuff is smart and wise and it has some biblical principle. But the lesson Jesus is teaching us is not be wise with your earthly money so you can have a better earthly future. This is not some Dave Ramsey spiritual, stewardship lesson. As a kingdom citizen, Jesus wants you to be thinking, how can I wisely, shrewdly use my earthly resources now in the present that will have the biggest eternal return on my earthly investment? The answer is creatively, wisely, but generously use your resources for others, for kingdom advance, in a way that brings people into the kingdom, in a way that reflects the compassion and mercy of the gospel. The fact is, money will fail. Verse 9 talks about, right? This worldly wealth will fail. And when it fails, money will run out, right? Money does not satisfy. And even if you have money to the end of your life, can you take any of that with you? No. All earthly resources will eventually fail. Ultimately, your earthly money will fail, but if you have used it for God's kingdom, if you have been generous to others, if you have used it in a way that does not serve you but pleases God, you will be more than taken care of in eternity. Earthly money itself has no impact on eternity, but how you use worldly wealth does impact eternity. Say, how? How can we practically do this? As the unjust steward spent his time meditating on thinking, oh man, what am I going to do? How can I act now to impact my future? What can I do with my power resources now to impact the future? Jesus wants us to put our minds and energy and time on how we can skillfully, wisely use our resources to have the greatest impact on eternity. Not just do it, but meditate on it, right? This doesn't come natural to us. How can we do this? Again, this is more than just money. This is all our God-given resources that will not come with us when we die. So how can we impact eternity with our resources? One, we need to, as I've been saying, use it for the gospel, to advance the gospel, to help bring others into the kingdom. Think of where my money can be used to have gospel kingdom advance. Obviously, giving towards your local church is a given, right? You are here planted to reach our Jerusalem, right? And money is a part of that, right? Money for the pastors, for ministries and things of that nature, that's a given. But also missions, right? Other organizations that are advancing the gospel. Other creative ways that you can use to bring people to hear the gospel. I remember former people in my old church, we would go to Christian camps every summer. And these Christian camps would focus on preaching the gospel, and they would literally sponsor kids who didn't have any money, didn't have much money. They would pay for a whole week of camp, and camp is not inexpensive, right? Those ministries need support, right? And they would sponsor kids, multiple kids, to go to a Christian camp. Some of those kids would hear the gospel and be saved, and they would have never gone if somebody didn't say, you know what? I can, instead of using this to pay, to save up for this or, some vacation or some this or that, I'm going to use this money for this kid to hear the gospel. Bringing people, using your cars to bring people to church so they can hear the gospel, so they can be spiritually fed. Using your house for discipleship, evangelism, Bible study, hospitality. There are other areas, kingdom related and gospel reflecting, that impacts eternity. How can I be compassionate with my money in order to show the compassion and mercy and love of Jesus to broken people and needy people that would point them to the gospel? That shows that you care for their holistic being. We've been preaching through Luke. In Luke chapter 12, we saw Jesus says this to them. He says, 12:33, he says, sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven, that's eternity, that will never fail, where no thief comes near or no moth to destroy. So your Christ-like compassion and charity for people's holistic physical and material needs reflects and points to the gospel, but also has impact on your eternity. You gain treasure in heaven. So meditate. How can we use our money resources in a way that shows mercy to broken and needing people? Charity and mercy to the poor and needy is an evidence, right? This is not like showing mercy and charity to people's material and physical needs and things of that nature is not a volunteer thing, right? When it comes to God's citizen. No, we must. That is a evidence that we have been regenerated by the gospel, right? You might have freedom in this country to not, or to share or not to, but God's people must. It's a reflection that we have been changed, that we have been made new. It's Christ-like. Church, think about, let me just say this. Sorry. One of the things I think we do with our conversations about money, a lot of times, as we're having conversations with our spouses or even ourselves, a lot of the talk looks very similar to how wise, unsaved people talk about their money. When you're budgeting and having conversation with your spouse or yourself about finances, how much is that conversation about how much can we increase our giving to the Lord's work? How can I invest my resources this month, this year, to impact eternal? Can we put aside $50 a month towards the gospel's sake, towards the needy? We give to a needy person or an organization that's ministering to broken people. Thinking about how we're placing money. Whether your money goes up or money is changing down, are you thinking, how can I resource God's money for his sake? Where can I place my money that it will have most impact on others? Again, this is not just money. Is there a way I can use my house this year to impact eternity? To show charity to others, to spread the gospel? How about my car? How about my lawnmower? Or any trade skills I may have, or money management skills? As I think about my time, how can I budget my time each month to minister to needy people, broken people? What people in this neighborhood, church, that I can use my resources to benefit? Is there a young person that comes here this morning or from VBS that I can minister to their parents with my resources and time for God's glory? You know, there are examples throughout history of Christians creatively using resources for the kingdom. And again, it's not always just money. A good friend of mine in college, he's a little bit older than me. This guy grew up in Papua New Guinea and very struggling in Papua New Guinea. They have literally one road, right? It's hard for the airplanes to land, right? And he's a super smart guy, can make a lot of money here in the States, but he's studying to become a doctor, not so he can work at the Mayo Clinic, but so he can go back to that country to minister to those people. He's not going to get much money at all. He's going to care for and minister and heal and give the gospel to people for the rest of his life. And you know what? He's going to be rewarded greatly in heaven, because any great money he could have made in the States is nothing compared to what's coming in eternity. Again, there's people like a very rich guy, William Wilberforce. He actually had a lot of money, but after he got saved, he used his resources and time, convinced by the gospel, to end the slave trade and slavery in Britain. There are other great examples. Again, you don't have to be rich to do this, right? But there's other great examples of churches who are doing creatively and giving towards needy people and impacting the kingdom. Think about this church in Indiana. I didn't realize I had a work connection with the organization that they work with. But back in, I think it was a few years ago, this church in Indiana, Northview Church. All right, now it's one of these big churches. Again, I wouldn't agree with every jot and tittle, but they are doing, this is something that's commendable. That's a reflection of God's heart. And they have a good amount of people, but every quarter they would ask people they have a large congregation. So they said, hey, just give a few dollars towards a ministry. Sometimes it's paying off debt, but here it was paying off medical bills. So say you have 10,000 members, each person gives a few dollars, and they typically raise between $6,000 to $10,000, and they applied that towards something. They're just saying, hey, just use a few different dollars. But they actually, a few years ago, worked with this debt buying organization, right? There's a way in which debt goes to collection, and people can buy debt for pennies on the dollar, right? And they will match your money that you raise and multiply it, so it will have great impact. So this church raised $30,000, and it wasn't that much per person giving, but a lot of people gave. And they partnered with this organization, and that organization paid off $4 million of medical debt for the people in that area. Now, I didn't realize until I was studying the story that the CEO of that company is my customer at work. It's crazy, but I had no idea. His name is Craig Antico and his son Eric Antico. It used to be called RIP Medical Debt. Now it's called Forgiveco. But that's just obviously they're a big church, right? But they're thinking of, man, how can I creatively use our resources to impact the kingdom and collectively love our neighbor for the gospel's sake? Church, We are a small church, right? We don't have many resources, but we still need to be thinking, how can we as a very small church use the little resources we have to have the greatest gospel eternal impact? As we look at our budget, at our ministries, at our building, resources, spaces in the building, how can we use what we have that God has given us to advance the gospel and show compassion and mercy of the gospel? Listen, we can't save everyone, we can't solve every material need, but we can creatively think of how we can best use our resources to have eternal impact in certain areas. Again, we don't have a ton, but we need to be faithful with what we have. And that brings us to the next part of this text, next application here. Look at verses 10 to 12. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. One who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? Now, a broader principle here in verse 10 here, in this section here, is being faithful with the little that you have shows you are ready for God to give you more to steward. All right, that's a broader principle that we see in other parts of Scripture. Being faithful with what God has given you shows not being faithful with what God has given you shows you're not ready for more. It's not giving us a lot as a church. But we do need to keep in mind, compared to a lot of persecuting church, smaller churches around the world, we are rich, right? We are rich. But God's not giving us a lot, but we need to be faithful with the resources God has given us. Both the people that God has given us and the material resources that God may bless us with. But the thing is, he may not. God may keep our church with small resources, but the principle still is in this text, be faithful, be faithful, be faithful, because you will be rewarded in eternity. God will bless us in eternity. And that brings us to the second application that Jesus is making here in verses 10 to 12. Be faithful with whatever resources God has given you, and he will reward you with eternal riches of your own in eternity. Be faithful with the resources you have. Faithfulness in small resources shows that you can handle larger resources. And again, God may give you small resources forever. He may abundantly bless you in this life. But what this does mean is that God definitely will entrust you with greater eternal riches and glory if you are faithful to what he has given you on this earth. No matter if it increases or small, whatever you have a lot or no matter if that goes up or down, just be faithful, be faithful, be faithful to what God has given you. You know, there are people who have much and are greedy. And there are people who have little and they use everything they have for the glory of God. Those people that have little will be greatly rewarded forever. It'll be worth it all. And those people who are greedy, that have much, that are self-indulgent, they will have nothing in eternity. The fact is, how we use our resources on this earth is a reflection of the God we serve, church. And in our very materialistic, money-driven culture, we must make sure how we use our money and resources expressly testifies God is the one we serve. And that brings us to Jesus' last application here in verse 13. Look at verse 13. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So third application is you cannot serve God and make money and possessions an idol. It just can't happen, right? You're either going to serve God or you're going to serve your possessions, serve your interests. You either completely give loyalty to King Jesus with everything that he has given you, or you allow your love for money to compel you to use it for yourself and let money be your God. And money is a horrible God, right? Our allegiance by our bank statement should show that we serve King Jesus. Our allegiance by how we spend our receipts should show that we serve King Jesus. This is an unsaved, secular social justice advocate that I agree with on some things, but is very wrong on others. But he says that this is right. He says, budgets are really a moral document. He's talking about when, a country's budget or, other government institutions, he's saying there are moral documents. And there's a lot of truth to that. Our budgets, our resources, how we use them, testify what is important to us. And they should declare that we serve a generous God, right? That we serve a mighty God, and everything that we have is his. And lastly here, a broader principle that we see in this text is God owns every earthly things, right? To be managed for his glory, right? It was the manager managing the master's money. The unjust steward did not have anything of his own. He was using the master's money. Nothing that we own, car, houses, time, ourselves, is owned by us, but it's given to us by God. And if we are in Christ, we know that we owe our eternal destiny to Jesus, right? We have been bought with a price, right? We are not our own. God has given up so much so we can be his. He gave up his own son, as we talked about in our songs that we are going to look at in communion. Jesus was made sin for us. His flesh was broken. All the sin that you ever done on Jesus. We deserve hell for our sins, but Jesus paid it all. And when we have realized how much we've been saved from and that we are God forever in Christ, it makes it easy to say, you know what, God, what do you want me to do with this money? What do you want me to do with this car? What do you want me to do with this house? What do you want me to do with this time? We need to teach this to our young people, right? Young people, you hear? Young people, you hear? You have things. You might be thinking you're broke, but you got toys, you got money, you got things that you have. How are you using that for others' sake? Or is it just about you? Every time you get something new, it's all, this is me, me. Or are you thinking about, how can I use this for the gospel? How can I use this for others? Let us all realize that we have God-given resources, God-given money, God-given things, and we must use it generously for God, for the kingdom's sake, to advance, to have great impact on our eternity.